Hello and welcome back to my garden. Today I am going to discuss with you guys ground covering and how to suppress and smother weeds while using things like tarp and landscape fabric. Right here in front of me I used a piece of tarp, and I like this the best because it's very heavy, it's very thick, and absolutely no light, air, or anything gets through. Well, water gets through because it slides underneath, but it's been raining a lot, so this was really the only moment I had with some sunlight to come out here and film this for you guys. But here, as I've laid down this tarp in front of my hydrangeas here, which the flowers have died, but I'm going to pull this back, and right here you can see how right here I have a lot of greenery and all the weeds and grasses, but here there's barely any. And a lot of that has to do with this tarp. This tarp, it blocks out the sunlight, so the weeds, the grasses here, they can't process or use any of the photosynthesis, and this will result in it dying out, and you're basically just smothering it out, but you're also blocking oxygen and in some cases water from being able to come through. I'm just going to put that back. If you're going to use this method, it's important to make sure you have something heavy like blocks, heavy wood, rocks, anything to keep it from blowing up, because if it blows up and it gets rain and sun, then it kind of defeats the purpose, right? Well, behind me here you see I use landscape fabric, and then I'm going to insert a clip and explain to you how I did this. I had to use 3 different pieces of landscape fabric because the area was so large and it was so overgrowth with weeds that one length of landscape fabric wouldn't cover it. So I had to use 3 different layers of landscape fabric just to cover the whole area. And all I did was I secured it down. I have a hammer and some of the pins, and I used a hammer to secure it down into the ground, so that way I wouldn't have to use rocks or anything, and I wouldn't have to worry about it blowing away. But so basically I rolled it out over the area, and I made sure to tuck everything in, and then to secure all 3 of the pieces I just used the basic stapler, nothing fancy, just basic staples, and I rolled the pieces together to connect them, and then I just stapled it along. And I did this all along that whole side where the weeds were overgrowing. And then after I did that, I just went back and made sure everything was in place and everything was tucked underneath. And I wasn't able to tuck everything underneath because it was just so much growing from over there, and they rarely ever cut the grass. But that's just basically what I had to do. I did this over the summer back in July, and basically with landscape fabric, it was very important for me to use the landscape fabric in the front yard because, like with many urban neighborhoods, next door to me I have a investor-owned house, and most investors, they come in and they'll buy a property, but there's no one living on the property, so they basically just boarded the house up and left it empty. And by them doing that, a lot of the weeds and grasses and invasive plants, they have begun to invade my yard, both my backyard and my front yard, as you can see behind me. So using the landscape fabric and using tarp, those are the most effortless ways for me to control the weed overgrowth coming from their yard, because I don't really have a lot of time to go over there and just pull up weeds, every other day, because they're not using any kind of weed control in their yard. So basically My plan is with the landscape fabric, that one, even though it's an effortless method, it takes a long time for the weeds to die out, because while it doesn't allow light in, it still allows rain and it still allows oxygen to come in. So it'll take a little bit longer to smother out the weeds versus with using tarp. But you know, tarp is very expensive, and so is landscape fabric, you know, to be honest. But you know, I didn't have enough to where I could cover the whole area with tarp. So I used the tarp in my backyard, and I just used the landscape fabric in the front yard. And so I plan to maybe put up a fence or use some kind of barrier to keep the weeds and the overgrowth from their yard from coming into my yard. I just have to figure out, you know, which method I want to use. But you know, I feel confident, you know, that after the winter and by spring next year, you know, once I figure out what barrier I want to use, I'll be able to, you know, maybe decorate and put some flowers or, you know, something a little more attractive, you know, over in that area. But you know, right now I think this is the best method if you don't have a lot of time and you're dealing with a situation like mine where, you know, the weeds are constantly coming back and back. You know, this is, you know, the best method for me to use. There are other, you know, methods of removing the weeds, but a lot of them, you know, require a little bit more effort. Well guys, thank you for joining me today. If you like this video, hit that like button and make sure you subscribe. Those buttons, they're down there. And make sure you check out my Amazon page. I'm also a writer, and I'll put the link in the description. And by doing these things, it really helps the channel, and it really helps the channel to grow. Well, thank you guys again for joining me. I'll see you later. Bye.